A midlife crisis is more than just a cultural stereotype. It's a real psychological struggle that can surface between the ages of 40 and 60. Often triggered by aging, loss, or unmet expectations, it can actually lead individuals to question their identity, make impulsive choices, or abruptly abandon long term commitments. While not officially classified yet as a mental illness, the emotional and relational fallout is very real, especially for the spouses and families left behind. This podcast gives voice to those living through the aftermath, exposing the hidden pain, and seeking accountability, healing, and understanding. Thank you for joining us today on MLC Bomb Drop and Beyond. The stories and events discussed in this podcast are for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or professional advice. Any names, locations, or identifying details have been changed to protect privacy. Any similarities to actual persons, living or dead, or real events are purely coincidental. The information presented on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional advice. Always consult with a qualified expert regarding any decisions related to your specific situation. The views expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the host or the podcast creators. Hey, welcome, Bomb Squad. Today we are meeting with integrated attachment theory coach, Mr. Bryan Power. And I'm going to read some stuff from Bryan's website here. This is pretty cool. The new F word. The new F word is failure. It's no longer a dreaded outcome. It's the new positive F word. To fail is to learn, grow, and push boundaries. Every misstep is a lesson. Every setback is a setup for a comeback. In a world that celebrates resilience, failure is not the opposite of success. It's often a necessary step towards it. So, Make Your Relationship Fail is Coach Bryan's website. It was born out of his experiences that radically changed his ideas about failure, trauma, the mind, relationships, and more. Through failure, he gained so much. He wants to now help others do the same. He wants you to know that it's okay to fail, but rather to accept failure as the thing you often need to experience in order to achieve success. So, embrace the fail because it means you're trying, you are evolving, and you're getting closer to your breakthrough. So we're going to meet Mr. Bryan Power. Again, he's a coach in integrated attachment theory, and his website is makeyourrelationshipfail.com. And all right, here we go with Coach Bryan. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Here is Bryan, and he is going to tell us his story. And I haven't heard it yet, so I'm just as excited as everybody else. All right. Thank you, Bryan. Thanks for joining us today. And the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you, Trina. I want to, just say thank you for just having me today because I've listened to some of your podcasts already, and I really enjoy your show. I love this topic of like midlife crisis and kind of some things that we deal with sometimes midway through our lives that can really kind of, have some really powerful effects. And my story today is maybe not as much of a midlife crisis as it is a crisis in relationship. Something that happened to my wife and I last year that was really just a crazy journey that I went on. And I will say at first when things did start to fall apart, I did feel like it was some sort of, maybe she was having a midlife crisis or some sort of mental breakdown. So I did feel like there was some similarities with that. But just to tell you about the story, my wife and I, a little bit about us, we've been together at that point about 8 years. In 2024, we have I have a 13-year-old stepdaughter who's about to turn 14, and she's great. But we also have together, we have a son who at the time was about 4.5. And he's now about 5.5, but early February of 2024, my wife and I had an argument, which is not completely uncommon, but also not super common. We had what I would call a very good relationship. For the most part, we had a lot of fun together, a lot of laughs. There was never any infidelity. There was never any, we didn't really fight very much. We really didn't, have any money issues or drug issues per se. There was a little bit of drinking, maybe a little bit more on her part than mine. I'm a little older and I just don't care to do it as much as I used to maybe. But other than that, really no major, what I would call major problems, that some couples face. Apart from some disagreements, different parenting styles, that was really, I think, our main issue was a lot of our parenting styles were different. And some arguments along the way. It was a very, what I would consider healthy relationship. But early February 2024, I had been working all day. I got home very late. My son had been acting up a certain way, and my wife was just tired. And she wanted to discuss this when I get home, probably about 8, 9 o'clock at night. And I just said, I'm sick. I had a sore throat at the time. I said, can we just go to bed? And she was just in one of those moods where she just wanted to push it and talk about it. And I just was not having it. I got very defensive, as I always do sometimes, and kind of shut it down and kind of like didn't want any part of it. And so that kind of led to a pretty good argument. It was that point she said, "Hey, after a day or two, whatever it was, we kind of finally got back a little bit." She says, "You really need to go to therapy." And I said, "You know what? I'm fair enough. You know what? I will be happy to go to therapy. I'm always willing to learn, kind of figure out things, not a problem. But I also want you to go to therapy." And so she agreed that we would both do some therapy, where there was couples therapy. I think at first we were thinking couples therapy, but it turned out I wound up having my own therapist. She wound up having a therapist that she was working with, and the therapist she was working with was a childhood trauma therapist special. I mean, she really specialized in childhood trauma. And so my wife started to see this therapist, and right away, my wife realized like I'm in trouble. Like I remember her coming home and saying, "You know what? I've got more issues than you." And I kind of looked her in the face and I said, "I told you so." But no, I'm not gonna not gonna really say that, right? But I mean, it was obvious to her that she had some issues to work on, and I also had, my own issues that I was kind of dealing with, trying to figure some things out. And we began this little journey of like going to our therapist, and we would have some really great conversations, thinking, things were really good, and then things would just devolve emotionally over the next few days, a week or so. And when I say devolve, I mean like sometimes just any little look or something I would say would just trigger heightened emotions, where it was just like she would break down and cry and just didn't want to talk to me, and it was like really kind of like, wow, this is really rough. And I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't understand what I was saying. I didn't know what was causing all this. And as she began to get more and more triggered over time, that began to trigger my emotions now. I went from feeling pretty secure about everything. We're going to figure this out, what have you. But all of a sudden, as I saw her more, devolving, it seemed, into her own emotional, chaos, if you will, excuse me. I started to get panicky, and my wounds began to get triggered. I have a fear of abandonment, which is a big one for me, that got triggered, or feeling of being alone or not good enough. And all these other things came up. Not to mention, I looked at my situation and I thought, wow, I don't know what I would do. Like if things don't work out with her. I'm up in Massachusetts. I'm actually originally from New Jersey, spent most of my life in Florida. I had moved up to Massachusetts to be with my wife. And so I didn't have a big network up here. I didn't have a whole lot of people to support me. I had moved here officially in 2019. I'd been here for a couple of years off and on, but in 2019, I made it official. 2020 happened, COVID. It wasn't a good time to make friends. And so things just kind of happened where I didn't have a big network. So anyway, long story short, the panic button of like, number one, was kind of losing my relationship. I kind of felt like I was losing my stability, my home. I had no idea potentially if I did have to move out, where was I going to go? And ultimately my son, that I had, which is my world. My son was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And so I started to just panic and think like, what is going on here? I didn't understand it all. And so we fought back and forth for a couple of months. Again, we'd have some really good conversations, triggered each other. Things would evolve. It just got really chaotic and just bizarre, really bizarre is the only thing I can say. It just became like, wow, what is wrong? But I started to understand a little bit more about the subconscious through that. So I'll talk more about as we go a little bit. But really, what was happening, I learned this later, is that a lot of our subconscious wounds from from our childhoods really were playing out, and the way that we attach in relationships was playing out. And that is something I learned about as well, was attachment theory. I learned a really great process called integrated attachment theory, something that was created by Thais Gibson out of Canada. And that really ultimately, I think, changed the dynamic of my inner workings myself and ultimately our relationship. So this kind of devolved, just get back real quick. This kind of devolved. And then in early June, it really kind of hit the fan. I came home one day, I took my son to a Red Sox game, his first Red Sox game ever. We had a really wonderful day down at Fenway. I came home and my wife is sitting on the steps and she says, "We need to talk." And I was like, okay. And so, and she had brought it to my attention, a connection that I made with somebody that she knew. And she thought I had reached out to this woman, but I really hadn't. It was just one of these miscommunications. Long story short, she eventually said, "Look, I'm putting a restraining order against you. You need to get out of the house now." And I said, "Wow, this is like, what? What? Like seriously? Like I just thought this is the craziest thing." But I took it very serious. I said, "Okay, no worries. I'm going to grab my stuff." I got out of the house and I moved on from there. And I at the first thought of this, I thought, well, I'll just go back to Florida. Like I just don't know what to do anymore. This is over. This is just I can't do this anymore. I'm gonna go back to Florida. And my buddy said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "You can't go back to Florida." I said, "What do you mean I can't go back to Florida?" I said, "That's where my family is. I have a very small family, but that's where they pretty much are. My friends, my support system." He says, "Yeah, but your son is there." And I said, "You're right. You're right. My son is here." He said, "My father abandoned me. Your father abandoned you." He says, "If you leave, your son's gonna go through that." And I said, "Man, I can't do that to my son." And so I knew that I was in a predicament. I was stuck. I had to step up, and I couldn't run away, and I had to figure out how to stay here. It didn't matter if I had to sleep on the street, didn't matter what I had to do, I was not gonna leave my son to go through this, pain, so I made up my mind to stay, and, right away, I found the place to stay off of Craigslist, like, just out of the newspaper, if you will, type of thing, with a total stranger, was able to kinda get my head on a pillow for a week, but I quickly realized that wasn't gonna be a very healthy spot to be in, so I started making some calls again to some people I knew in the area. Again, I had already reached out to a lot of them, and a lot of them said they just didn't have anything for me, they couldn't put me up for a little bit. So, but I figured, well, I'm desperate. I'll just try it again. Like, what's the worst could happen? And I happened to talk to a friend of mine named Bob. Bob was a casual friend of mine I'd run into from time to time. And he happens to say, yeah, he goes, listen, come on over. I've got a great 2-bedroom apartment. It's a real nice upscale place. He says, come on over. You can have the other bedroom. I said, wow, are you serious? And this is amazing. He says, you want to come see it? I said, no, I'll take it. I didn't sight unseen. I said, I'll take it. Right. So I wound up getting over there in the next day or two and, was able to kind of get in this apartment with Bob. Now, little did I know that really I feel like God was working here because Bob was also going through a divorce. And Bob was really kind of really battling hard and just emotionally drained and just really struggling to put it all together. As critical as my situation was, I had kind of put my nose to the grind, made up my mind that I was going to get through this. And I zero alcohol, no drinking, just head down, going to church, studying stuff that could potentially help me. Anything I could do to kind of get on the right track. Whereas Bob was just trying to like get through the day and was really struggling. So together we were able to kind of help each other, have some really great conversations. And yeah, I just know it was the right place for me. And some real healing happened for both of us there. And so I'm really,
Let me ask you,
yeah.
um, at Bob's, when you were staying with him, did you think were you focused on trying to reconcile and get back to
No,
your family?
as soon as the restraining order was put on, I kinda made up my mind that it was over. I had no inclination of getting back with my wife, and, I just was like, "Okay, this is just done. I just wanna figure out how to live my life and move on." I had no idea what to do. I just wanted to get my life together, and so, luckily, I found a place with Bob, and Bob, funny, he lives literally about a mile from where I was living, where my house is, and so I was close to the family, if you will, even though at that time with the restraining order, I couldn't touch them, I couldn't talk to them, I couldn't have any contact with them, so it was very difficult in that regard, but at least I knew I was close enough, in the area, and it was just comfortable for me a comfortable place for me to be, so, in that regard, my physical needs at that point were now being met, and so I can now breathe a sigh of relief and feel like, okay, I can now focus on the emotional side of this and try to continue to do the work. Right as the relationship was ending, I actually did come across again the integrated attachment theory program through Thais Gibson, and I started to understand the attachment styles and how our core wounds start to play out in relationships and how that really affects us. And so I was already fascinated by this, and I tried to approach my wife with it at the time and say, "Hey, you want to look into some of this?" And she was kind of at that point where she just didn't really care. She was just dealing with her own stuff and whatever. She just wasn't open to like listening to it. And so it is what it is. But I knew that there was some real meat there. I knew that there was like, wow, there's some answers here. And so at the very least, even though it was over, I felt like with my wife at the time, I said, I know there's answers here, and I'm really excited to learn this stuff, continue to do the work and let the chips fall where they may. So yeah, so I just decided to pick up my pieces and move forward and put my head to the grind and let life happen, let God bring whatever needs to happen in my life happen. And honestly, it's funny. From the time I made up my mind to stay in Massachusetts, it was like just good things kept happening for me, and met some really great people at church. Started dating somebody casually, just as a more of a friend through the church a little bit, and we do some hiking and was able to get out and just realize, like, you know what, there's a lot of wonderful things in life and in this world, and one thing I absolutely know is I'll never really have to be alone unless I choose that, right? Like, there's really great people out there. So I always feel like you got nothing to worry about. Like if you're just a friendly guy, good person, there's a lot of wonderful people that will happy to meet you. And you just have to find the right one that kind of work with you and meet you where you are and all that good stuff. But right away, just things started to happen. Got really deep into the integrated attachment theory program, started to learn as much as I could. Actually decided to, Thais does a coaching program, and I decided, you know what, the idea of being a coach sounds pretty cool. I didn't know if I would be a coach or not, but I just didn't care. I just wanted the information. I thought if I can use this to help other people, great. If I just use it to help myself, that's great too. If I use it to have, conversations in the future with friends and family or whatever, that's okay too. I just felt like I couldn't lose by getting more and more information. But I've always been somebody that likes to help other people. I was a fitness coach for many years. And so the idea of being a coach kind of intrigued me. So I decided to jump in, take the program, and I just continued to learn. And I was just fascinated by the program itself and the core elements to integrated attachment theory that I think are such game changers. And there's six main elements to the integrated attachment theory program. And just so you know, like integrated attachment theory has kind of been around since I believe like the early 50s, kind of took off more in maybe the 70s. But it's just more just understanding the attachment styles is one thing, but trying to fix it and how to kind of utilize that information. I think that's where Thais Gibson did a great job of bringing the program together and bringing in these other six elements to really kind of make it all work together. And that is number one, working on your core wounds, which really your core wounds develop throughout your life, many times through childhood, very formative years. And that's kind of where my wife and I think, developed a lot of our issues. But it really happens a lot through repetition and emotion. Those are the things that will really begin to bring on core wounds. And if they're not dealt with, then you can begin to have those core wounds play out in your life into adulthood and even later in life. Sometimes they can actually speed up a little bit. I think those core wounds, like any wound, if it's not healed and fixed, it can fester and sometimes get worse, and sometimes reach a critical stage. And so I think that's what happened to my wife and I. But the core wounds is number one. The second thing is understanding your needs, okay, and really knowing who you are internally. What are your needs? What does your spouse need? And begin to work on those and kind of meet as many of those needs on your own that you can. We all have a need for connection or some of that stuff. That's fine. But as much as possible, not, having to lean on other people so much to meet our needs, learning what our needs are and then trying to get those needs met on our own as much as possible. Once we understand those two things as well, we really need to focus on our emotions. How do I handle my emotions? What are my emotions telling me? There is no bad emotion. Anger is not necessarily a bad emotion. Anger is just another. It's information. That's all it is emotions are information. So if anger is just information, then I just have to ask myself, what is it that I'm angry about? What is it telling me? What do I need to learn here? Right. And so there really are not necessarily negative emotions. Those are valid. The question is, how do I deal with those emotions and how do I really kind of utilize those emotions maybe in a more positive way? Another thing is the boundaries, right? So number four is boundaries. How do I set boundaries, healthy boundaries? I don't want to be too extreme, but I also don't want to be too loose with my boundaries. How do I set good, healthy boundaries and make sure that make sure that people adhere to them a little bit without being, again, too extreme in that regard. Of course, I want to work on my communication. That's a hard one, right? How do we communicate? And sometimes when we have different communication styles and the way we kind of communicate, that's a huge one. How many people talk about lack of communication in their relationship or just really poor communication, I think is a big one. Just sometimes we're talking one way and the person deals with it a different way. And that can be a lot to do with our attachment styles and kind of how we hear things and see things and our point of view, right? Our perspective in life. Sometimes when we hear X, somebody might say X, but they hear Y because of their own perspective, they take it in a certain way. Or again, it may trigger a certain wound when it doesn't mean to be. I may not be trying to hurt my wife. I may be trying to say something healthy and good, but maybe I just say it in a way that doesn't come out that way to her. And so learning how to communicate in a healthier way has been huge. And then, and last but not least is really our behaviors. How do I change my behavior and really begin to act in a way that deserves, respect and shows that I know how to handle myself as a real man and that kind of thing. Like our behaviors are huge. So those six elements are game changers in any relationship. And that's what I finally realized. I said, you know what? I'm going to learn these things. And if it means I just do it for myself and I'm happy to learn more about me, then that's great. But I knew if I did, that anything could happen and good things could happen. And they did, a few months later, I had to fight for some custody for my son and get some visitations, but eventually my wife and I were able to talk. And when we did, we both realized that we did love each other and we did want to, bring it together. And we had both been doing some work. She had continued to see her therapist and work on that childhood trauma. And she had been doing a really good job there. And through the work that I was doing with my own therapist and some of this integrated attachment theory stuff, we had come to a little healthier spot in the relationship. And this was probably a good 3 months after the split. Um, so we had a quick conversation, and it was one of these things like, okay, we realized we wanted to get the restraining order off and see what we could do to kind of have real communication. Now, the restraining order still took about another month and a half to come off. So even once we realized we wanted to, it was another month or so, month and a half before we're able to really get it off and begin to have real communication again. And I really feel like once that restraining order did come off, we were able to kind of put our relationship back together. From there, it's just been kind of a good situation. And because of everything that she realized, a lot of the stuff that she recognized and stuff that I learned during our time away, it was able to come back around and make this work again. And that's one of the things I want people to understand is sometimes space in that relationship, people talk about no contact or, kind of taking that time away, I think can be extremely healthy for any relationship that is broken and having real issues. If you can take some time away to learn your weaknesses, your areas that you can fix up a little bit, and the other person does their work as well, then it can come back together. It doesn't mean it will, but it definitely gives it a pretty good opportunity to come back together. And there's no guarantee with that. So that's the thing we always kind of worry about. Well, what if I do all the work and that person doesn't do the work and now I'm here and they're there? Well, that's kind of their issue, right? Because if I do the work and they can't meet me, then I may be able to have a healthy relationship with somebody else and they still can't. I may have to deal with that. Or what if the other way, they do the work and you don't, right? And now they're the ones having a good, healthy relationship and you're kicking yourself because you're like, man, I wish I'd have done some work because I'm missing the person there. I wish I'd have done it. I didn't. Okay, well, now if neither one does the work, yeah, you can come back together here, but that's probably going to get into the same old stuff as well. So that's not really good either. So what's the best case scenario? Best case scenario is that you do some work, they do some work during that time away. You're both doing some healing. You're both getting some answers. You're both figuring some things out. And now you can come together and have a healthier relationship, knowing you have some more tools, some more ways to deal with things, some more understanding. Like it could be such a positive thing. I always talk now about, the breakup could be the best thing for your relationship. And I truly believe sometimes the harder you fall and the harder it is, the better it can be, because I think the harder it is, you can get a lot more awarenesses. And because when it's really drastic, it can really be an eye opener, right? Because I think before this happened between my wife and I've had some experiences, I've had some issues over the past and stuff, but it never really hit that critical level like this. This was just so bizarre, but I saw so much there and I knew that I had problems. I had issues. She had issues. I saw all the issues and stuff were blatant. It wasn't this casual undertone where maybe there's issues, maybe it's her, maybe it's me. No, it was like, it was both of us. So I think sometimes when it's a critical stage, it's okay. And sometimes that's a gift. I look at it as a gift because I'm thankful that it was as critical as it was for me, because it really allowed me to take some action and turn that around and say, wait a second, this is critical. We don't have time to, play around anymore. Work needs to be done. And so yeah, if you're in a really desperate spot, just understand that it doesn't have to be punishment. It can really be a gift that you're getting if you take the right steps to work it. So I'm happy to report, my wife and I've been together now. We're in mid-July here. So we got back together mid-October. And, just another quick funny story. Literally, as soon as I get back, things start going well. I'm staying at the house, but I'm also living with Bob. And, we're kind of in between for a week and a half or so. And it turns out we wound up getting kicked out of our apartment. So a week and a half after, I finally get my life back together, we get kicked out of our apartment. So I was like, wow, what do I do now? And, my wife was like, well, you could move back in. And, she said, let's think about it for the weekend. And by the end of the weekend,
Oh, wait, let me roll back. So
yeah,
you and Bob got kicked out?
Bob and I got kicked out of our apartment. He had some things happen that also weren't his fault per se. Crazy. This is how crazy things were. I was like, wow, okay. But as it was an amazing time, because had that happened, a month sooner, I didn't know, I wouldn't have known where to go or whatever. But at least at this point, my wife offered up the place and said, well, you can come back in here. I kind of thought through it for that week. And then I said, I'm not ready to do that. I said, I really want to make sure we take this slow, give it some time, make sure we're doing okay. And so I actually wound up grabbing an apartment. I literally that night, when I realized that night I started looking and I found an apartment literally like a quarter mile from my house. And it's really hard to find good housing here in my town. It's not easy to do. So again, another miracle that I felt like was like, wow, this door just opened up. I was able to get this really cute little 2-bedroom apartment, affordable, a little on the higher side for me, but I was able to do it.
Bring Bob?
What's that? No, just through myself. At this point, I was on my own, and Bob wound up moving back into his home. Bob had an episode where he ended up in the hospital for a week, and it was alcohol based, but I don't know if it was alcohol induced, but he essentially ended up in the hospital, and they told him he can never drink again. And so Bob's been doing really well in that regard. Bob has quit drinking completely. It's been 7, 8 months now, and so I'm really happy for him. He's looking great, feeling better in that regard, and it was again it's kind of a gift for him to kind of go through that. It was hard as it was, but that kind of really damaged him to a point where he needed to get serious about that, and so he was able to turn that around. And he lives with his father here in town, and his father has a really beautiful house, and so he's got his own little, kind of like his own little apartment within his father's place, and so he's doing great living with dad, and Bob is doing very well at this time, and much better situation. But it was an amazing time for both of us to help each other through that, and I'm eternally grateful for Bob and the friendship that we have, and what we experienced together. It makes me choke up a little bit just even thinking about it because without Bob, it was both of us I think really were there. I knew that God knew that I needed Bob, and God knew that Bob needed me. So it was a really great time.
Yeah, I would think that's a really dark period, and for you to both go through that and to know what each other's going through at that
Yeah,
time was a huge support, you know?
for sure. Yeah, yeah. Some real miracles happened. And so yeah, so it was just a crazy, crazy journey. And so at the end of that, I wound up getting this apartment, by the way. I never ended up staying there. I wound up living at the house with my wife, and just I had this little side apartment that I was paying for. And after about 2 or 3 months, I finally was able to get out of the lease on that, and they were able to rent the place to somebody else, and I just made the official move back into the house. And so I've been officially pretty much in the house almost since we got back together in mid-October. But yeah, so that's kind of the way that went down, and all the little things that happened through that, though. I mean, the amount of awarenesses I got. I will tell you, I forgot to mention back in the beginning when things started to really devolve. I was having like night sweats, and this is how I knew things were really messed up. I would fall asleep, and it was literally I must have been having so much stress. I'm a teeth grinder to begin with at night, so I grind my teeth at nights to begin with. But I was doing so bad, like I was having night sweats, and some nights I would wake up where I would just be sweating on maybe my left side, and then the next night it might be sweating on the right side, or maybe it was like here. It was kind of spotty here and there. Some nights I would wake up and it would just be full on sweat all over, and I'm like, I've never had night sweats before like that, right? So this is kind of different for me, and I'm thinking like, okay, is there something wrong with me? Do I have like a disease now on top of like everything else happening to me? Looking back, I realized that it was just stress. This was literally my dreams, my night. This was part of like these things coming out of me, if you will. All the stress, even when we close our eyes, sometimes the body holds on to it, and the mind knows and goes to places. Even when we're sleeping, it can put us in places that we really don't want to be. And so I will say now that I haven't had a night sweat in many, many months. Those are gone, and my body feels better for the most part. I have a lot of back pain and back stress and everything else. And I see therapists and chiropractors and some massage therapists and stuff like that to fix that. And I will say it's better. Is it 100% yet? No, not there. But I feel like we're definitely going in the right direction. And so I think people don't realize how much stress and how much of these core wounds can affect our lives, not just emotionally, and the choices that we make can be affected and all this kind of stuff there, but also physically. The body knows the score. I believe it's a book by Gabor Mate, and it's like one of these things where the stress is stored in our bodies and can cause other issues, health issues, and concerns that can back to haunt us just because of all that stress that we haven't dealt with. So it's been a crazy journey for me, and I'm super thankful for it though. Honestly, one of the greatest experiences of my life. And I would go through it 1,000 times over if I had to learn this stuff, and to learn the attachment theories and how that works and plays out. Has been amazing, and to learn how to communicate better. We have some. I have tools now, and that's the thing I like to tell people is I have relationship tools that I never had before. That we know how to do things differently. I'll talk about communication real quick. One of the things my wife and I like to practice is something called holding space. Usually when you get into talking or a little disagreement, my wife would start talking, and I would naturally want to jump in and defend myself and tell her you're wrong, and that's not how it went down or whatever, right? And now it's this banter of back and forth defending. Nobody's really listening to understand. We're just listening to defend and all that other stuff. So now we do something called holding space, where we look each other right in the eye. The other person will talk for 5 or 10 minutes, whatever it is they need to discuss, and the other person just listens. And we listen to understand. We don't listen just to defend, when it's my turn again. I'm listening to understand. I want to hear you. I want to understand your perspective, right? So when that person talks for their 5 or 10 minutes as I'm trying to understand their side, Then when they're done, the other person gets their time to go. And it's really kind of nice because you realize, okay, I don't have to jump in. I don't have to interrupt her. I'm going to get my chance to speak and I can voice my opinion. I can agree or disagree. Fair enough. I get to voice exactly how I feel and my thoughts on that. And what a different way of doing it, right? Because I think of how many people who, get a little emotional charged and you naturally want to, get into this discussion. And especially if you're anxious, like I kind of was leaning a little bit more on the anxious side where we have a fight. I want to talk about it immediately. Where she was more on the dismissive side and she's like, nah, I need some space, give me time to process things. Might be a day or two, maybe a week or two. In the meantime, like my emotions are charged and I want to get through this and stuff. So I would say when you're triggered, and that's triggered means your emotional state is just in a heightened state that, is again, not a level 5, you're at a level 10 where your just emotions are really high. It's never a good time to have a conversation at that point. You always want to find yourself get away from that situation and get to a point where you're relaxed and you're able to, feel more regulated so you can have a really healthy conversation. I feel like triggered conversations only lead to really bad events. And so that's one of the things I always suggest that if you're having an issue, you're struggling in your relationship, communications, think about it. If you're triggered and you're having a conversation, stop, 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 stop. Get to a good point, emotionally rested, feeling, and now you can have a healthier conversation. So, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun, like learning these tools of the integrated attachment theory, and we're now applying them a lot more, in our relationship, and we have our relationship is 1,000 times better than it ever was. So yeah, that's kind of my story. I can get deep into it if you like. I could talk a little bit more about some of the attachment styles if you're interested in that.
Yeah, I've got 2 questions.
Yeah,
One,
yeah.
how did you even hear about the integrated attachment theory? Was it through one of your counselors?
No, so actually the integrated attachment theory, I just started, YouTubing and just looking for answers. And I stumbled upon some of Thais Gibson's videos. And when I
Wait,
actually
wait, no, that was my second question. How do you spell that?
Thais and Gibson, Gibson, and she's
Okay.
out of Canada. And the one that really stuck with me is she did a really great interview with Mel Robbins. It's an hour, 15-minute long interview, and she really did a good job of detailing a lot of these attachment styles and the 4 different attachment styles. And by the end of that hour and 15 minutes, I was hooked. I was like, wow, this makes some sense. And the attachment styles like really just kinda rocked my world, and I said, "Man, this is incredible," and so I just kept getting into it, once I was hooked into some of her work, I kept looking more at this stuff. I was looking at my wife as more of a what's called a dismissive avoidant, and dismissive avoidants tend to isolate a lot more, they tend to be extremely independent, they tend to not be as good at understanding their own emotions, so they tend to be more they have emotions, but they really don't know how to connect with their emotions. They struggle with that, and they kinda learn how to deal with their emotions on their own, right? And so they just it's not it's just the way they cope with it. And it's the way they learn growing up. A lot of times their parents probably, is one of those maybe they have parents who said, you know what, oh, you're emotional, go to your room and deal with it, right? And so rather than a parent that maybe says, well, tell me about that. Let's talk about why, they just learned how to like, okay, well, I'm emotional. I have to just go figure it out by myself. And so it's just the way they kind of learned how to cope. So that was kind of the way my wife was leaning was like this whole like dismissive, didn't want to talk about some things kind of was she was a stonewaller. My wife would stonewall me. In other words, like she just wouldn't talk. She would shut it down and you couldn't talk to her until she was completely ready to talk. Which I understand more now, but at the time, it was really kind of hard to understand that. And it's just an unhealthy way to do it. But at the same time, when somebody is in that zone, the best thing is to do is to let them have that space. So I learned that I was looking at her style and some of her dismissive avoidant behaviors. And then I was looking at my own and realizing, okay, at that time, I was definitely leaning more anxious. I had a lot of anxiety about, fear of abandonment is a big one for what's called an anxious preoccupied attachment style. So, fear of abandonment, not good enough, feeling like you'll never be loved or you're going to be alone. Some of those things are kind of the core wounds there. And I realized that was kind of my attachment style at the time. So I realized, okay, I've got to get that under control and work through that. And then in the middle of that too, is what's called the fearful avoidant. And the fearful avoidant will kind of swing between the dismissive and the anxious and kind of go between feeling really connected and really kind of loving and this and that, but then also turn around, sometimes the next day or a week later, they're really on the dismissive side, needing space. They kind of struggle between like, where to land, in that regard. And all 3 of those are just the really kind of the unhealthy attachment styles. We're all trying to work towards what's called a secure attachment style. Secure attachment style is just people that have learned how to deal with their trauma. It's not that they didn't have trauma growing up. Everybody has trauma at some point in their lives. It's just a question of, did they learn how to cope with that, process it, deal with it in a healthy manner? And for whatever reason, it may just be good parenting. It may just be, they figured it out themselves somehow along the way. They've learned how to deal with it. And they now have the ability to have their emotions under control better. They know how to communicate on a different level. They don't have those subconscious wounds. That's the thing for me that I really blew my mind. Thais made a comment that said, 95 to 97% of our decisions are made through the subconscious. And I was like, wow. And that's really what hit me, because and that the conscious cannot outwill the subconscious. And I was like, wow, that's true, because I felt it, because there was, no matter how much I knew, here I was secure, here I felt good, here I knew I was fine. I'm an older guy, I take care of myself. But when things really started to just devolve and go to this way, I couldn't stop the train wreck, and no matter what I tried to do, these emotions and these triggers from, again, just more my childhood wounds were playing out. And I remember talking to an ex-girlfriend of mine who I'm, still very good friends with, and, my wife knows about her. We're all good like that, nothing like that, but, I was in the middle of talking to her about the situation, and she says to me, she says, "Bryan, you sound like a drug addict." She says, "You sound like a drug," and my father, struggled with drug addiction. And when she said that, I said, "Man, I feel like a drug addict." I felt like I couldn't stop myself from focusing on the problems and these issues and the emotional turmoil of it all. It really hit me hard. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. But that's how I really began to understand how deep the subconscious can play out in these things. So you talk about your show, The Midlife Crisis. I feel like some of what we went through is almost midlife crisis like, and I wonder if sometimes a midlife crisis, I wonder if it's a combination of maybe not having our needs met, all these, and maybe that's kind of playing out. Maybe it's gone on for years where our needs weren't met. And now we're kind of finally getting to that point where we just, you're realizing things in your life, you just kind of hit that wall. Maybe, maybe the childhood trauma is playing out there as well at that time. I don't know. I love the idea of the midlife crisis thing, not fully understanding it. It's one of those things that certainly I think is hard to understand, right? The whole idea of like what really happens for people, but I think there might be some meat there as far as childhood trauma. Some of these things are playing out, and maybe that's really kind of playing out that causes some of this midlife crisis stuff. That's been festering for years. Maybe it's been festering for their whole lives, and now they hit a point where they're faced with it, and these things start to play out in such negative ways where people can really destroy their lives. And sometimes it's hard to ever come back from that. Maybe you can, maybe you can't, but like maybe some things that you do along the way that really destroy it, and which is really sad. So for me, I want to help people hopefully get to that point where they don't have to, completely ruin their lives by having a midlife crisis or even having this relationship crisis like my wife and I had. I just feel like if you're struggling and dealing with some of these things, don't be afraid to get some help. Reach out, get as much help as you can, and try to, understand as much as possible, and work through them before you really get to that chaotic point. There's not, the restraining order is one of the worst things. I always say it's one of the worst things that ever happened to me, but it's also one of the best things. And yes, I'm thankful for it. But at the end of the day, I say I would go through it again if I had to, but I really don't want to, right? Like it's not something you want to go through. It's not like you want to have a midlife crisis. It's not like you want to have your life turned upside down and go through a crisis of identity or a crisis of, character and all these other things. Like, no, it's a horrible, horrible thing to have to go through it. And all the repercussions that come from that with all the people around you, your family members, your friends, your kids, a lot of people suffer from it. So I just feel like, man, try to get the help that you can. Do some childhood trauma work if you're able to. Get some help. Get some help in any way that you can to avoid it. But
Were there periods, before the restraining order, like, when you look back, was there a period where you could have gotten help that you guys didn't?
I feel like we did. I feel like the way it happened for us, it was just supposed to happen that way. But at the same time, yes, I feel like if we could have gotten a lot of this help sooner, we could have avoided getting to that critical state, but unfortunately it took kind of getting to that critical stage before we both realized we need to get the help. And then by the time we started getting the help, it was almost like a double-edged sword. Like here we were getting the help, but also because my wife would go and have therapy, that would kind of trigger some of the emotions of her childhood. And she would come home with some of these things that she was now reliving and going through in her mind. And it would almost trigger the emotions even more so. So now it was almost like adding a little bit of fuel to the fire at a very critical stage. So I actually credit it for helping us in the long run, but also kind of adding a little fuel to the fire at that time. So something to consider. I mean, definitely, I don't recommend waiting till you get to the critical stage to begin to get the help. If you can get the help earlier on when you know there's some smaller issues, work on them before they get to the critical stage. That's a much
Or
better way to go.
actually start doing the 6 steps. I think it's 6 steps?
Yeah, I mean, the 6 steps with the integrated attachment theory, absolutely. As far as your relationship goes, if you can learn your attachment styles, begin to work on your core wounds, begin to learn how to communicate, understand your needs, and if you begin to do all that work, that's going to take you to a really great level on the inside for yourself, but also begin to play out in your relationships, not just your relationship with your wife or spouse. It also will play out with your family members, your friends, your coworkers, because we do kind of take these attachment styles and these wounds into other areas of our lives, not just our spouse. The spouse can be the one that triggers it the most because that's often the most emotionally charged one. But the other ones can also be very, hurtful or helpful when you learn how to do those better. So absolutely. But beyond that, I want to encourage anybody to also get some, if you need to work with a therapist as well, find somebody who can deal with childhood trauma, find somebody who can, teach you some other things as well. Obviously the integrated attachment theory is wonderful. And I think you can do a lot with that. But if that isn't enough for you, then it's okay to, go in further and get more help if you need to. Everybody has their own journey there and they have to do what they have to do to get the help before it really kind of gets to that critical stage.
And are you presently coaching couples?
Yeah, so I am. So I have a website now called Make Your Relationship Fail. If anybody wants to, they can connect with me there. So Make Your Relationship Fail, or you can go to My Relationship Fail. Either one will take you there. I definitely encourage anybody that comes to me to join the Personal Development School, which is Thais Gibson's school. And in there are so much information. And you can literally spend days and I've been in there for a year and a half now, and barely touched the surface. I feel there's so much great stuff in there. If you feel like you need a coach, if you feel like you need somebody to talk you through this, help you through that, make sure you're doing the work and everything else, then absolutely, I'm happy to help you, do that. I'd be happy to coach you through that experience as well. So yes, I offer my services as a coach, but I don't want to feel like you have to use me as your coach to get some help. You can get some help, and really is very cost effective to join. You can do a monthly, you can do a 3-month membership, you can do a lifetime membership, really whatever works for you. I would suggest probably at least a 3-month membership to really begin to get some good foothold on that. And yeah, I'd be happy to offer my help. If you go through my website, you can join Personal Development School through my website. And when you do that, you're not only going to get the best price available, you're also going to get a free session with me. So at that point, I'd be happy to set you up with a free session and give you some tidbits as to what to look for, how to maximize the program and get some really good information through it. So yeah,
Wow, that's really cool.
that's an added value if you go through my website. Yeah,
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Brian.
absolutely.
Um, and, uh, do you feel like, our listeners are everything from just, maybe they haven't had a bomb drop, maybe they're at bomb drop, maybe it's been a few years. Um, uh, I guess everybody can benefit from this?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I truly believe if you're struggling in your relationship at all, right? If you just see those small signs, like that's an issue. That's a little bit of a warning sign, right? Those little warning signs, if they are not dealt with properly, if they're not communicated properly, you're not working through those are the little fights that could ultimately lead to where my wife and I eventually got, because those could be warning signs telling you, hey, let's get some help. Let's fix this up before we get to that critical stage. And that's what happened to my wife and I. We saw some warning signs, but it wasn't too bad. And we just kind of try to get through that, but without understanding that, it just devolved into something even crazier. So, absolutely, if you're in that small stage where things seem pretty good, but you're just a little off, you don't feel 100% fulfilled, you know that the relationship communication is tough, you can get answers there. Now, if you're on the other side and you've got to where I got to, where your relationship has now failed, you're now separated, you're heading for divorce or even divorce at this point, I want you to catch your breath. And I want you to know one thing, that it's not permanent. Nothing that's happening there is permanent. Anything can change. I don't care what your spouse tells you, they hate you, they never want to see you again. Any of that, that's all emotionally charged stuff that may or may not play out, right? So I truly believe if you take the time away and you take your time to heal yourself, you take your time to do the work, not knowing what the other person's really doing, whether they're doing the work or not, doesn't matter. It matters that you do the work. And if you do that work, you're going to get yourself to a spot where you're now going to be capable and able to have a healthier, happier relationship with whoever it is that you decide to eventually be with. Now, if you're fortunate enough, like my wife and I were, to kind of come back together and make it work together, that's great. I'm very thankful for that. That would obviously be my first choice. But even if that didn't play out, I would say that I'd still be okay, right? Because I did the work. I know that I would still be okay and I would have a healthy relationship with somebody. One of the things my wife would always say, even when we were right near the end, she would say, "What do you really want?" And I'd say, "I just want to have a healthy, happy relationship with somebody." And what I realized it doesn't have to be with her. Okay. That's another thing I had to do is I had to let her go. We have to let that person go. So once we let them go, that's the hardest thing to do sometimes is let the person you love go. Well, what's great about that is number one, they get to figure out, heal, do what they need to do, make their choices. They're no longer trapped. They don't have to be with me. They owe me nothing. But should they choose to come back to me, how wonderful is that, right? My wife and I, we choose each other today. And we choose each other on a daily basis. But I also say, hey, if my wife chose to not be with me tomorrow, would I be disappointed? Sure. Would it hurt? Sure. Would I survive? Yes. Would I move forward? Yes. Would I stop loving other people? No. I'll find love. I'll learn how to love again. And that's just life, right? So obviously, I don't want that to happen. I want to have a wonderful, long life with my wife and pray for that. But I understand that life happens, people change. We can't force people to stay with us. We have to be willing to let people live and go and choose us. Let them choose us. We don't have to trap them. We don't have to manipulate them. We don't have to do anything. Just be ourselves, live our lives and let them do the same. And then we can choose each other. And that's how really I feel like a happier, healthier relationship works is two people really just loving each other, letting each other live their lives, but sharing it in a way that's, so wonderful that you get to share your thoughts, your feelings and everything else and help meet each other's needs as possible. But yeah, just in a healthier way overall. And so that's what we have today. And yeah, that's what we have today. And I'm really happy for that.
I think when most couples start out, they assume it's like that.
And that's the thing. Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times you go through those stages, right? You start dating and it's good. And you realize, oh, this person's kind of cool. Then you go through the honeymoon stage and everything's like, awesome. But then you go through the other stages, power struggle stage, commitment stage and stuff like that. That's where things get tricky. So that's where it kind of landed for my wife. And I seemed like, okay, yeah, we were great for a while. Then once I moved fully to Massachusetts and my son was born, now we began that power struggle stage. And that's where we begin to have those little fights and say, okay, well, how does that work? And that's where things really start to play out. You're like, "Ooh, wait a second, who is this person?" And you start to think, well, that's not who I was dating. That's not who I fell in love with. But it is. And it's not necessarily the good parts of them, but it could be just those, again, those wounds, it's their perspective. One of the things that dismissive avoidance will do is they'll flaw find. And my wife would flaw find on me and be like, little things where I'm just like, well, like to me, I'm pretty easygoing guy. So it was always like, I didn't understand it, but that's just her way of kind of coping. And it's a fear-based thing. All these things a lot of this just has to do with fear, So her fear is like me leaving her and maybe one day I'd walk out on her. I did move back to Florida at one time. So that was kind of always in her back of her mind. So what does she do? She prepares herself for that. And how does she prepare herself for that? By flaw finding, by telling herself, well, he's not all that. He does all these little things that annoy me, right? So little flaw finding that prepares herself to walk away. God forbid it has to happen and not be as emotionally hurt. Is that a healthy thing to do? Of course not. That's not coming from a healthy spot. But again, that's what we do when we're wounded. When we're wounded people trying to live out these lives, we're doing things that are just so unhealthy that cause these problems. And that's why I say we've got to get to the point where we can understand our wounds and begin to work on them. And there are some exercises that you can do in Thais' school that will help reprogram the subconscious so that you can get to that healthier spot. And again, if you need even more, like, again, I believe in childhood therapists, trauma therapists, and some of those things can really kind of help as well. But yeah.
And you know what? Going through MLC, that's a really important thing is to look, I think, for somebody who specializes in trauma and the childhood wounds or, that rather than just marriage counseling, you know, because so many don't get the help they need. And then everything just unravels and falls apart. And it could be
Yeah.
so late.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that.
One
Absolutely.
thing I liked about the Tice Gibson's thing, from your website, you mentioned the personal development school. To me, when it says personal development school, it sounds sort of individualistic. Is it, really personal
Yeah.
development?
Yeah. I mean, it is. Absolutely. It's 100% personal because it is you. Ultimately, does it help fix relationships? Sure. But it helps fix the relationship with yourself first. And I
That's
truly
awesome.
believe that that is the biggest relationship we can ever work. It's the only one we're in control of, right? I can't control the other person, whether they'll do the work or not. The only one I can control is myself. So how do I work on me? How do I personally develop so that I can kind of get to that next level and just have some faith along the way. And that's what I did. I just kind of took it as I'm going to do the work and let the chips fall, and again, I kind of gave up on the relationship at that point. I wasn't thinking about fixing my relationship. I was literally just wanting to figure out how to live and stay here in Massachusetts so I can have my son in my life and do the best I could to hopefully maybe meet somebody else and right, fall in love and maybe have a healthy relationship with somebody else so that my son could see a healthy relationship. That's all I ever wanted for him to see a good, healthy relationship. And so, but yeah, personal development, it's all about you. And that's what I love about it though. Like you can get in there. I'm telling you, there's so much stuff in there you can learn. It's amazing. And there's really wonderful people. She does wonderful webinars almost daily, and then they do a lot of post hangouts where you can talk to other students, people in the class, people who are going through some of the same stuff you might be going through. And you can get in there and just talk and learn and have a community where people are really kind of working together to heal. And it's just been, to me, a godsend, and truly thankful that I've come across her work. And Thais Gisson is just wonderful. I love her. She's just got a great personality. She's got heart. She loves people. She's just a wonderful person and a hardworking woman who's really figured out some great stuff on how to help people. So I'm encouraged to just help her promote
That
the school and anything I could do for that. So yeah.
Aw, thank you, Brian. And you know what? Community is key, going through this. It
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the bigger the community, the better the tight. You don't have to say a big community because I don't, but a good community that can
A
understand you.
community that gets it,
Yeah,
that you can
community that
work.
gets you and that can validate you and go through this with you a little bit and kind of work with you through that because it's extremely hard. Again, I talk about the time. I mean, it was emotional to the point where I was having a hard time just functioning on a daily basis. Like I said, I was, my ex girlfriend called me out as like almost acting like a drug addict, and that hit me hard because I realized it felt like that. I mean, it was just overwhelming.
And it
Um,
does feel like that.
yeah, and if you don't have somebody to help you through that and give you some answers, like, then it's really hard. So I definitely feel like, if you can talk to somebody like me, I've gone through some of this. If you're dealing with something similar to what I've gone through, by all means, I'll be happy to jump on a phone call with you, be your coach if needed, and we can walk through this together a little bit. But yeah, having people that can understand, and that's what I love about that community is there's so many people that are on the dismissive side, there's people that are on the fearful avoidance side, there's people that are anxious side, and there's people that are now secure. But most of those people that are secure in there have come through the program to get to that point. And so there is hope that you can overcome these wounds and you can get to a point of secure and have good, healthy relationships. And so that's what I love, though. It's a great community there for sure.
Well, I love that you guys are back together. You both grew and, are becoming individually stronger people and united for your family, and now you're giving back. So that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, it's been
And
the
and
greatest experience of my life. Honestly, it's been one of the hardest things I've ever went through, but also one of the greatest experiences of my life. And again, I
oh,
don't
great.
I don't want people to have to go through that, but if you have to if you are there and you're going through it, just know that it's okay. You're gonna be okay. I always feel like the harder you fall, I talk about a super ball, like, the harder a super ball hits the ground, the higher that super ball can bounce. And so right now, if you're feeling like that Super Bowl where you're just spiraling out of control and things are falling and you're gonna hit hard, that's okay. If you let it
You can
do it
bounce back
properly,
up.
you can bounce that much higher because of that hard hit. So I like to think of that and turn it around into a positive. I like to take all the negative stuff that seems like it's coming our way and just flip that over. Say, this is the best thing that's ever gonna happen to me. I'm learning. You know what? My spouse leaving me right now could be the best thing ever for me. Okay. You know, maybe we're gonna get back together, maybe we won't, but either way, I'm gonna be better off for it, and I'm gonna have a better relationship for it, and things are gonna be better for it. It's just experiences, and when we can take that approach, we don't panic, we don't, it's just a different. I think it's just a better way to go. The emotional turmoil isn't there, and we're just able to kind of really, I think, turn the quote unquote negative situations around and embrace them more than worry about them. I always talk about, Thomas Edison again. So it took him 10,000 tries to invent the light bulb. And every time he failed, people would laugh at him and tell him, you're crazy. You're never going to do it. You're failure. And he would just say, no, I've learned one more thing not to do. Right. And I'm getting closer to the answers. And eventually he obviously invented the light bulb and we all know him now today. Right. So I like to take that approach.
Yes, and without him, we wouldn't even have electricity or a podcast or any of this knowledge that you're trying to share.
That's right.
Thank you, Thomas Edison. Uh,
That's right.
and and you had mentioned, really 2 websites. So one I wrote down, so makeyourrelationshipfail.com, correct? And what
Yep.
was the other?
It's myrelationshipfail.com. So myrelationshipfail.com. It's just MY, make your relationship fail. So I just shortened it. So you can either go and spell it out, make your relationship fail, or just go to MY, make your
Okay.
relationship fail.com.
2 URLs, 1 website.
Correct. Correct.
Okay,
And you can
okay.
see my story there. And again, if you want to jump in, you can actually take the attachment quiz through my website. It'll tell you a little bit more about your attachment style. And again, if you do want to join the personal development school, join through my website. You'll get the best price available at the time, and you'll also get a free session with me. I'd be happy to kind of help you through that. We can talk about, maybe how to get the best out of the program.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you, Bryan. That's a lot of info for everybody today, and I'll summarize it again in a second. But thanks so much for joining us today here on Bomb Drop and Beyond.
Oh my God, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. Thank you. I hope you'll have me again sometime.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, that was great. I hope you guys got a lot of ideas, and I hope you're encouraged. Be sure to visit Coach Bryan's website. Again, that is makeyourrelationshipfail.com or just myrelationshipfail.com. Either one is going to get you to his website, makeyourrelationshipfail.com. And on there, be sure to take his quiz. He's got a quiz on attachment styles. I haven't done that yet, so I'm going to check that out too. Um, and also, if you sign up for that personal development school, that includes a free complimentary session with Coach Bryan, as well as, he's offering a variety of different types of coaching to fit everybody's needs and stages and things like that. So check it out. And again, remember, what is it? The new F word is failure, but it's a good failure. All right, guys. See you soon. Bien, you guys, forward moving spouses, you are not alone. Left behind spouses, you are not alone. Those in crisis, you are certainly not alone. This is just crazy how epidemic this has become. I have a waiting list now of people from around the world that I'm trying to get to. And if you've been through a midlife crisis or been impacted by someone else's and you want to share your story, I'd love to hear from you. Hang in there, you guys. I will get to all of you. Please reach out to me at mlcbombdrop@gmail.com and visit us on Facebook and Instagram, MLC Bomb Drop. And just remember, your voice matters. Your story could be the one that helps someone else feel seen. It could help someone else feel heard. And it will help somebody else feel understood. You are not alone, no matter where you are in your journey. If the bomb was just dropped, the earthquake just happened, if you are 7 or 8 years in and you're coming out of starting to wake up and awaken to this, um, you are not alone. It's sad that this is epidemic, but we're here to provide support. So until next time, take care and live authentically each and every day. Thanks again, you guys.